much. So, I hope you don't mind me, I'll just introduce myself briefly. I was a member of a small revolutionary organisation, the SWP. We tried to form a left of Labour organisation some time ago, back in the early 2000s, with others, called the Socialist Alliance. Wasn't really working out for us, so we crashed it. Then we tried another one called Respect. Wasn't really working out for us, so we crashed it. So then at the start of this year, I and a few hundred other members of this small revolutionary organisation left it to form a tiny revolutionary organisation. And I've spent months tearing into the leadership of my former political home. Now I'm here to talk to you about unity on the left. But actually, I like to think this experience is not totally irrelevant because, you see, this is not just a conjunctural problem that we're describing. I mean, this is structural. It has more to do with the structures of the emerging sort of capitalist social formations today than to do with bad politics, tactics and so on, although that is important. Across Europe, radical left formations have been in development, well, for about, let's say, a decade or so for many of them. Part of the basis of this has been, as Kate pointed out, the capitulation of social democratic parties to neoliberalism, the emergence of so-called social liberalism. Which is a contradictory type of politics wherein, within the social democratic parties, a bourgeois and neoliberal leadership attempts to gradually co-opt, fragment and transform social democracy into just another variant of free market capitalism. Something like, if you can imagine it, the Democratic Party in the United States. In the British context, this is made to look like pragmatism, even though it involves quite a determined political effort by the leadership of the Labour Party against its own base, with quite profound potential consequences, as we've seen in Scotland, for example. So why should the UK alone, really, have no radical left party of the same stature of the left bloc, Syriza or Die Linke? And I think, as I say, it's not just about an ill-founded political strategy, for example, the crashing of Respect or whatever. It's not either to do with just a lack of confidence or some other subjective factors. I think really it's more fundamentally because the defeats of the left and organised labour in Britain have been far more profound than elsewhere. There's neither a significant remaining communist tradition in Britain, as there was in Portugal, Greece or France, no split in social democracy in a serious way, as there was in Germany and France. I mean, in the continent, the acquiescence of social democracy in neoliberal politics was often, I don't want to overstate this, but often a shock to their supporters of these parties, and that produced a rebellion in the left wing, which was the basis for significant splits by figures such as Oscar Lafontaine and Jean-Luc Mélenchon. In the UK, however, the hard defeats of the unions, the militant left, and even municipal socialism meant that Labour could begin swerving to the right a lot faster and a lot further. The basis for Tony Blair's neoliberal revolution within the Labour Party were laid already well before he took office. So those who remained active in the party and who still voted for the party sort of knew what to expect. And I remember becoming a socialist around the time that New Labour took office, and there was an expectation that their honeymoon, as it were, would not last for long, which was not, I mean, that was not borne out in practice. There were polls showing that Tony Blair had 90% support in some of the opinion polls, you know, it was, and even the loss of 3 million working class voters in 2001 election didn't seriously damage Blair because of the weakness of the opposition, which again was to do with structural reasons, long-term reasons, the long-term decline of conservatism, and also because of the geographical concentration of Labour's vote. So while individual policies like the private finance initiative and the war on terror, for example, disappointed and shocked supporters, there was neither an infrastructure nor an underlying ideological basis for a weak Labour left to split. I mean, and in practice, such sort of minor splits as did happen were imposed by the Labour leadership as part of an ongoing war against the left. You can think of Ken Livingstone's independent bid for London Mayor in 2000. Which was the result of a fixed election. Or even George Galloway's essentially he was pushed out. He didn't want to leave in the context of the anti-war movement. So as a result, the initiatives that there were formed didn't actually enjoy the support of significant sections of Labour's base or its apparatus. They made some important inroads, I think, particularly Respect. And again, note that the Labour Party leadership, its approach in response to Respect was to treat it as far more serious an opponent, potentially, than its foes on the right, including the BNP embarking in Dagenham. And that's an example of the pragmatism. It never relented, and they did everything they possibly could to thwart, break up, and reabsorb elements of any emerging left of Labour formation. And this is exactly the sort of process that the political theorist Gramsci would have characterised as transformism. So at any rate, without annexing a sizable chunk of the base of the Labour Party, without taking some of its councillors, its MPs, its trade union members, formations like the Socialist Alliance in respect were far too narrow. I mean, there were also deficiencies internally. There was, there's a platform debate happening in left unity today. There certainly wasn't in the Socialist Alliance or respect. And that's because they were organised on the basis of what some people have called a federal slash-up, whereby the leaderships of a number of existing formations simply bartered over what the general positions would be, and whereabouts took place, they generally reflected the weight of the respective organisational constituents. I mean, and apart from that, I mean, this is certainly how it is with the SWP in respect. The political leadership that acted more or less under their own steam and kept even their own members in the dark. So it is perhaps no accident that the breakup of respect coincided with the credit crunch and the ensuing recession. And it's also important that on a number of key issues by this point, sorry, how long have I got?
A couple more minutes.
All right, okay. A number of key issues, Labour had moved the agenda to the right. I mean, it was under the Labour government, under New Labour, that campaigns were launched against welfare claimants, that workfare was seriously mooted as a solution, that social resentment against chavs, so-called feral youths, nightmare neighbours, teen gangs, ASBO kids, all this resentment was aroused and channeled into a sort of right-wing authoritarian politics. And this resonated with a longer-term, generational decline in support for the welfare state, which is obviously linked to the manifest deficiencies of the welfare state, the areas in which it fails to be a genuinely collectivist type of organisation, in which is actually quite competitive aspects of the public sector, particularly if you're trying to get a school for your child or something, or even repressive, for example, if you're trying to get job seekers' allowance. So it was in this context that it was possible for the right to shift the ideological balance, to treat government spending as the major cause of deficits, and this as the most important political aspect of the emerging crisis of capitalism. And that's why we're in a situation today in which some of the worst aspects of austerity, some of the most sadistic aspects of austerity, are also the most popular, according to opinion polls. Talking about cuts to job seekers' allowance, talking about forcing people, single mothers, to report to the job centre for work, things like that. So this doesn't mean, by the way, that austerity is not contested. Of course it doesn't. Elements of it are, and even those aspects of it which are popular are still opposed by significant minorities. But the point is that the grounding assumptions about the public sector, welfare, government spending, are ones that generally favour the right, and that's the problem that we are faced with. And we can't expect Labour to counteract this, because everything they do suggests they want to consecrate that as a consensus. If Miliband's move against the Blairites was supposed to change anything, in this regard it didn't. Liam Byrne was replaced by Rachel Reid, who basically articulated the same anti-welfare, anti-universalist, scapegoating gospel. So we still need to organise people politically on the left and outside the Labour Party. And we need to be prepared for not just intervening in immediate struggles where they take place. I mean, I know this is very popular, the idea you've got to intervene. Yeah, of course, but perhaps we should be doing something else as well. Perhaps we should be thinking long-term in the same way that the ruling class does. We should be trying to construct the ideological and political basis upon which a new left can be born. We should be trying to shift the balance of opinion. We should be trying to build from the grassroots, the ground up, systems of alliances capable of bringing together the very heterogeneous forces that are affected by austerity and of engaging them in a generational programme of reconstruction of the left and the labour movement, the trade union movement. Now, I don't claim that left unity, whatever party form it takes, is the single answer to all this. But I think it's an essential part of the answer, and I'll finish on what sort of formation I think it should be. It's been suggested that the orientation of left unity towards Syriza is misleading, which in a sense is true because, I mean, we aren't founding a British Syriza. We would be fortunate if we were. We don't have the same sorts of materials. We have far fewer materials, and we're going to have to be very creative with the materials that we've got. But in that line, I read some of the platform discussions with interest. I mean, I guess in the abstract, the platform that I most agreed with, strangely enough, was the socialist platform. And yet I desperately don't want it to win. And I should perhaps explain why. I mean, it reads to me like an anti-Stalinist, internationalist, class struggle, socialist program. Wonderful. Problem is there aren't that many of them in the UK. And you can't unite the left on that basis. I mean, I think the number of people who are ready to fight in the here and now for a moneyless, stateless society as one of the indicative votes of the Socialist Party platform advocated is actually even smaller. And because I think it's abstract and alienating and not sufficiently responsive to where the struggles are going to be in the coming years, I think what we need is not another cosy gathering of relatively orthodox Trotskyists in their periphery, but rather a party that seeks to implant itself in concrete social and political movements of the oppressed, of the exploited, of the 99%. A party that, respecting the specific ecology of these movements, tries to ally itself with them and to condense their concerns within its own agenda. The reality is that austerity is affecting people in ways that affect them not just at the point of production, though that is central, but also as consumers of services, as women, as black people, as gay people, or as disabled people. And that's why the Left Party platform, when I read it, in addition to championing socialism and defending what's genuinely egalitarian and collectivist about welfare in the public sector, it also talks about feminism, it also talks about anti-racism, it also talks about environmentalism. It is concrete, not abstract, and it's out of that concreteness that a practical form of socialist politics can be built. This is what it means to be part of building a system of alliances, a movement of the 99%, of the working class majority, a complex unity, a unity in difference. That is the basis upon which the left has to organise itself today.